Okay, before we start, I just wanted to tell you what's happening so that you don't get confused. I'll be playing two characters today. When I'm sitting down like this, I'm the narrator, okay? When I'm standing up, I'm someone else. Deborah, when I become someone else, can you go and get my other things just from over there? Thank you. Okay. So let me tell you a story of two armies. On one side, there was the army of the living God. They were led by King Saul. King Saul was known as being the biggest man in Israel. He was a very, very big man. When the kids saw him, or when most of the population saw him, they'd say, "That's the biggest man I've ever seen in my life." He won quite a few battles. He led the battles. He didn't just stand back and tell the armies to go forward. He actually went into the battles and hacked people and did his thing. But, it was no problem for him. He had the best armour. He was the biggest man. The children in Israel will be likely to be singing something like, "My king is so big, so strong, so mighty. There's no one my king can't beat." So they're on one side. On the other side, there was the Philistines. There's a valley in between them. And the armies were lined up on a hill on either side of the valley. That was the thing to do in those days. It made a lot of sense. You had the high ground, you had an advantage. In between, there was a valley. And that valley was contested ground. If you won the valley, well, you won the war. The Philistines was different from the Israelites. They had a different code of honour. Their code of honour said that you cannot win a fight as an army unless your gods are with you. If your gods aren't with you, you shouldn't even be bothered going to the battle. Also, if you send one person into battle, you can tell if the gods are with you or not against you by having a man-to-man fight. And that's what the Philistines did. They sent their best man out to stand in the contested valley and say, "Come down and fight. And we'll decide this war on the basis of one hand-to-hand combat." So I want you to imagine that valley. There's a brook in the valley. Nowadays it's a bit more on the Israelite side. It might have been in those days as well. And that's the brook that makes that valley, causes that valley through the erosion and whatever else. So that's a brook there as well. I just want you to imagine that. Into the valley strode this man, and he made Saul, the biggest man in Israel, look like a very small man. His name was Goliath. In English we say Goliath. Whoa. There we go. You cowards! You mighty men of Israel, your bellies are cowering, shivering in your boots. For 40 days I've come here and challenged you. Why have none of you got the honour to come down and decide this battle? I claim this ground for the Philistines. I claim it for their gods, Dagon, Beelzebub, Astaroth, Asherah, Baal. Will you not come down? Saul, are you still up there pretending that you're sick? Or you're really shivering in your boots? Come down. You're supposed to be the leader of this group. Come down and fight honourably. I stand here and claim this for our gods, for our culture. Well, what's that? Are you trying to insult me? Are you sending me a present? I don't want to have a slave boy. He's not even wearing armour. What are you doing? How dare you send that man down here? Do you come at me with sticks and stones? You think I'm a dog? Well, I'll tell you what. After I'm finished crushing you like a little grasshopper, I'm going to find the mighty men of Israel. I'm going to slit them open. They will have no honour. Shield bearer, get my shield. So Goliath moved forward towards David. David was the name of that young man that he saw coming who had no armour on. Goliath moved forward towards him. And David ran towards Goliath, and all of a sudden, the Philistines saw Goliath crumple. And they didn't see anything other than David swinging a sling around his head. They turned and they ran because obviously God was not on their side. Their gods were not on their side on that day, and they ran. And the Israelites came forward and they chased after the Philistines all the way back to their cities because obviously God was on their side. Because they had, for a while they had forgotten that God was on their side. They were relying on their king. They were relying on the size of their king. But that's what happened on that day. After 40 days in between the two armies.
Thank you, Peter. What were you feeling? Anything? You felt Goliath was tall. I must admit I was concerned about the ladders and tripping on robes, yes. But I got past that and I could enter into the story. Does anyone have any questions for Peter? Maybe why he said something, why he did something? Was there anything you were wondering about? You can be brave.
I think when Margot said that Goliath was overconfident, I think Goliath had good reason to be overconfident because he was wearing like the biggest helmet, bronze helmet that you ever heard of. Okay, and he was wearing like the heaviest armor that you've ever heard of, and great big things protecting his legs. And he had a massive spear, like I don't know, my spear that I had might not be as big as the spear he had. He had a great spear. So how's anyone going to get close to him to chop him with some weapon? So he had a lot of reasons to be very confident in his own ability. And he also, of course, felt that his own ability, if he'd won, that he would have felt that that was because his gods were on his side, besides his own ability. So, yeah.
How did David know what to do?
So David did know how to use a slingshot. That's what so he took out into the battle shepherds' weapons, things to protect the flock. That included the slingshot that he would sling at the wolves and whatever else that came towards his sheep. And he took out a staff, which is a shepherd's staff, which you can use to guide your flock and to help protect the flock as well. And so he was obviously pretty good with a slingshot, but I'll just say this to you. I don't think that he had any chance, this is speaking as a Christian, I don't think he had any chance of missing. Once he did his best and sent that stone on the way, it was always going to hit Goliath and kill Goliath, okay, because God had it in his hand. David had to do his best in the situation, had to trust God, but that stone was never going to miss. That's what I'll say.
What else? What else were you thinking? Were there other thoughts or questions that came out from that story?
I find it interesting that you have two nations. Both of them have a spiritual orientation. So as a nation, they are expecting their future to be determined according to the gods, according to their belief. But in actual fact, they have the same temptation we have of relying on the physical things. So they were relying on Goliath, and the Israelites were looking for an alternative to Goliath.
Yeah, they chose the biggest man in Israel, a great warrior too. So like a Goliath of Israel.
Saul.
Yeah, Saul was the Goliath of Israel, but he wasn't as. He was totally scared of. You can read it in the Bible. He was totally in fear of Goliath because Goliath was so much bigger. It's the first person he's met that's been so much bigger and stronger and better than him.
I love how you brought up the song. So you were saying that the kids would sing, how great Saul is. But a bit after this story, the women sing. And the women actually sing how great David is. And it was like, oh, we love Saul. He kills, I think it's thousands of men. But we love David because he kills tens of thousands of men. And, of course, Saul hates that. Really hits his pride. And, of course, you know where this story leads. The battling with Saul and David, and people like David more, and Saul, it's his bitterness. And you see the problems when you're relying on people, isn't it? Rather than God. Karen. Well, once again, David's the youngest, and normally it's the eldest son gets chosen for everything. And so often we've seen this pattern, haven't we, in the Old Testament? And it's not always who you would think it would be. And once again, David's the youngest, smallest. Any other thoughts or questions?
Saul had lost the ability to continue to trust God and had got used to trusting himself.
And that's easy to do when we get more skills and more confident in what we're doing.
And it doesn't matter whether it was wealth or smarts or
Mm.
whatever skills. That's always a temptation.
Mm. Mm. Yep. Yep. Mm. And if he got it wrong, he would have died. He didn't, and he knew, but the risk, the alternative was. Mm.
He spent a lot of time alone with the sheep and with God. So, unlike the men in the army who had spent time practicing their skills with their sword and their spear, he was practicing the presence of God and knowing what God was in and what God wasn't in and that sort of thing.
He also had experiences where God helped him. The whole thing reminds me of a theme that looms large to me. We read in the Bible it says, I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac, and this perspective of God helping generation after generation. And when you look backwards, you can see that God has been there. And you have an expectation as you look forward that God will be there. But right now, here today, when I'm faced with a problem, suddenly I forget about God. And so Saul and Israel were in that situation. They had all the history and every reason to believe that God would help them. And they got into the situation and they couldn't see that right now it's about where is God and where is my trust in God. So it's about what's in my heart rather than what's in my head.
Which we I don't know, I default to. I assume I'm not the only person. You know, that you, first of all, you very quickly, something arises that's a challenge or something really bad or little, and we go to our head and be like, how am I going to manage this? How am I going to fix this? Or what? And yeah, rather than the initial going to God straight away. Who feels like they have a bit of a Goliath moment happening in their lives right now? Something that is large before you. Doesn't have to be giant, right up there, but something that's large. I'm not going to make you share it. That's all right. You can just... No one's facing any moments? 1, 2, 3. 4. 5. Another one? 6. 7. You noticed it takes some people to say it and then more are willing to. So those 7 people, I want you to know you're not alone. There's possibly a few more in here. You're not alone facing something that feels big. There's a community here of people that are here to support people that are actually going through different things. So I want to pray. Let's pray for those people right now. Jesus, we thank you that you are here. And I thank you for these 7 people that were brave enough to admit that they're facing something hard. So, Lord, we ask for your provision. We ask for your favour. We ask for your goodness over these situations. We also ask for your peace and resolution. And I pray for each person, each and every one of us, but in particular the 7, just for an increase of faith. May their faith increase. And I just pray for a revelation from yourself to these 7 people that you are with them and that you go before them. You know the exact giant that is before them and you have a way. We ask that you hold each of these people with your love, your healing and your grace and your mercy, your wisdom. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Does anyone have one last thought? There's something that they've been thinking about, haven't said, before we go into communion. Ted. Yeah. We come in the name of the Lord. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And that's exactly what it is. You know, through these stories we've seen a pattern. We've seen a pattern of Yahweh delivering his chosen one from the chaos, the chaotic waters, from greater forces, from death. You know, we all encounter different struggles in our life. If you're not encountering any now, you will later. They're all of varying degrees. all different troubles in different areas. It can be work, it can be school, relationships, families, businesses, just an unsettled heart. And it's what Ted was talking about. Our fight in this world isn't against flesh and blood. As he went in the name of the Lord, it is against principalities and powers. You know, when we think of that, sometimes we go, well, yes, but you know what? Joe Bloggs, I hope you don't know a Joe Bloggs. Joe Bloggs, he's fighting me. He is trouble. You know, he's a person. And yes, he is. He's another human being, just like you. And I don't know what it is, but maybe it's pride. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's selfishness that's causing him to do what he does, that's causing you problems. Fight and pray against that, not Joe. You know, Goliath, he was hit in the head while he was wearing this bronze helmet. And there's many times the word bronze is mentioned with his armour. And he's wearing this scaly armour, and I think it's a bronze sword that he has. And you know, the same Hebrew letters in bronze is serpent. And there's quite, in this story, we didn't want it to be extremely graphic, there's a lot about the head. You know, David goes and cuts his head off and parades it. The helmet, the serpent. You know, the curse of the serpent in Genesis 3 is you will crawl on your belly and you will eat the dust. And you know what it says when Goliath fell? He fell face first into the dust. And the seed of the woman will crush your head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. It's a Jesus story. Like so many of the stories in the Old Testament, here's this another one pointing to Jesus. You know, when Goliath was up there, way up here, and he was taunting God's people. And then this little boy came. I just saw that picture. I felt that emotion of the cross, of the taunting of evil. And yet, Jesus, a descendant of David. And he sat at this table. Before he was on the cross, he sat at this table with his disciples, with one that betrayed him. And he said, one of you is going to betray me. And Peter goes, not me. There's no way. It's not me. I wouldn't do that. And Jesus says this line. You know how Peter's also called Simon. And he says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. How interesting is that? It's like a Job moment, isn't it? But Jesus said, I've prayed for you. I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. Now we know quite a few things happen in Peter's life. But we do know he does remain strong. You know, he's right there in these stories in Acts. And he's a big part of the early church. He's a really big part of spreading the news of who Jesus is. We wouldn't be here perhaps well, yes we would because of Jesus. But Peter played a big part in us being here today. Because he spread that news to not just the Jews, but to the whole world, to the Gentiles as well. But back to that night, we can see that there's some evil happening. Jesus has alluded to this quite clearly with Peter. Then we come to the garden, and they come to arrest him. They come to arrest Jesus. And the disciples around him say, Lord, should we strike with our swords? And an ear is actually cut off. And Jesus says, with an exclamation mark, no more of this. He says, no more. Then he basically says to the guards that have come, what on earth have you come for with swords and batons? You know, Jesus has not been violent. Nothing changes. And he says to them, he says, this is your hour when darkness reigns. Jesus' enemy wasn't flesh and blood. Jesus' enemy was the power of evil. And Jesus died, and he broke that power of evil by defying death and rising again. You know how David came up to Goliath? He was young, he was small. First of all, Saul gave him his armour, and he had all this massive armour on. And he went, I can't do this like this. And he took it off. He took it all off. And he laid down the sword. We need to do the same. You know, we're all flawed. All of us. And it's one thing to say that, well, yeah, others are treating me badly because they've got a spirit of pride or greed, but you probably do too. Or something else. That's why we all need Jesus. And we all need to partake of this table. We're all invited to partake of this table of communion. And it's communing with others. It's a table of confession. It's a table of forgiveness. It's a table of laying down our protective barriers and trusting in Jesus. It's a table of compassion. It's a table of love. It's a table of peace. Because Jesus on the cross, he took all the wrongs of this world. Jesus on the cross, he took everything that we've done, our sin, he took and consumed that, but he also took all the wrongs of this world. He took all the wrongs that have been done to you, all the trauma of this world, he took on that cross, all of it. All the wrongs of this world, all the pain, he took to set you free. So we're going to listen to a song. And I want you to, during any time while it's playing, you might want to sit and just think for a while, pray. When you feel ready, just come up and take the bread, which represents his body given for you. And take a cup of juice, which represents his blood that was shed for you. He took it all. And I want you to think about what you need to confess and ask for forgiveness for. And also, what do you need to ask the power of God to do in your life and your relationships? So 2 things as we come to this table. What do I need to confess and ask for forgiveness for? And what do I need to ask the power of God to do in my life? So when you're ready, come and take.